Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something that represents not just years of your life, but the very essence of who you are, only to see it treated like trash? Imagine that something is a symbol of sacrifice, of honor, of unwavering commitment. That's what happened to me. My name is Marcus Thorne, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. I moved to a quiet neighborhood looking for peace, but instead, I found myself in a battle I never expected, all because my homeowners association president decided my history, my service embodied in my dress blue uniform, was nothing more than garbage to be burned. He thought he was just tidying up. He learned he was poking a hornet's nest, and that hornets sometimes have friends in very high places, friends who still live by Semper Fidelis. What's the craziest HOA story you've ever heard or experienced? Let me know down in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to hear if anyone could top this. Because what followed was a lesson in just how far one man, armed with righteous anger and the discipline of the Corps, would go to defend his honor and, in doing so, restore a little bit of sanity to an entire community. This is that story. The little house on Sycamore Lane was supposed to be his sanctuary. After 22 years in the Marine Corps, and the gaping hole Sarah's passing had left in my world a year prior, Willow Creek Estates seemed like the quiet corner I needed. It wasn't the vibrant life Sarah and I had always talked about for retirement, filled with travel and laughter, but it was calm. I spent the first few weeks unpacking boxes that felt heavier with memories than with their actual contents. Her photograph was the first thing I set up on the mantelpiece, her smile a silent encouragement. My new routine involved methodical organization, a habit ingrained deep. The garage was my project, not just for tools and lawnmowers, but for my keepsakes. Tucked away in the back, in a heavy-duty garment bag, hung my dress blues. The deep blue wool, the crimson stripe on the trousers, the gleaming eagle, globe, and anchor on the collar. Each element was a chapter. Sarah had pinned on my gunnery sergeant chevrons at that last promotion, her eyes shining with pride. That uniform had witnessed our wedding vows, 20-odd Marine Corps balls, and more solemn ceremonies than I cared to count. It was more than fabric and thread. It was a testament. It's my history, Sarah, I'd thought, carefully zipping the bag. Our history. My initial interactions with the neighborhood were sparse. A polite nod here, a brief good morning there. I was still finding my footing in this new, civilian world, a world that felt strangely unstructured after decades of regiment. Then I met Mr. Bartholomew Higgins. He introduced himself as the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a title he delivered with the gravity of a man announcing his coronation. Mr. Thorne, he'd said, his eyes, magnified by thick glasses, raking over my freshly mowed lawn. He held a clipboard like a scepter. Welcome to Willow Creek. We pride ourselves on maintaining a certain standard here. I trust you'll find our community guidelines, which you should have received. Quite clear his smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a thin, assessing line. A certain standard, I mused. My lawn was already to regulation, so to speak. He seems like the type to measure blades of grass with a micrometer. I just nodded. Understood, Mr. Higgins. I aim to be a good neighbor. Excellent, he replied, though his tone suggested he reserved judgment. Over the next few weeks, I'd see him patrolling, clipboard ever present, his gaze lingering a little too long on any perceived infraction. A misplaced recycling bin, a garden hose not perfectly coiled. He was a man who clearly relished his little kingdom and the petty power it afforded him. I mostly kept to myself, focusing on settling in, the quiet hum of my new life, a fragile thing I didn't want disturbed. The day it happened, I'd driven out to the National Cemetery to visit Sarah's grave. It was her birthday. I'd left the small window of my detached garage open a crack for ventilation. I'd been sorting through some old paint cans earlier, and the smell lingered. I was gone for perhaps 3 hours. 3 hours that would ignite a firestorm. When I returned, there was an acrid smell in the air. A plume of smoke curled lazily from a designated community burn pit near the clubhouse, a good 50 yards from my property line. My stomach tightened. Willow Creek was having one of its community cleanup and beautification days, an initiative spearheaded by Higgins, of course. I'd seen the flyers. I walked towards my garage, a sense of unease prickling my skin. The side door, which I was sure I had locked, was slightly ajar. My heart began to thump a slow, heavy drumbeat. Inside, things seemed mostly in order, but then I noticed it. The space where the garment bag containing my dress blues had been hanging was empty. Just an empty hook. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I scanned the garage, a desperate hope warring with a sickening dread. No, it can't be. Maybe I moved it, but I knew I hadn't. I was meticulous about things like that, especially that uniform. I strode quickly towards the burn pit, the acrid smoke stinging my nostrils. A couple of residents, volunteers by the look of their matching neon yellow Willow Creek cleanup crew T-shirts, were poking at the smoldering embers with long sticks. Higgins stood nearby, arms crossed, surveying the scene with an air of profound satisfaction. "Mr. Higgins!" My voice was sharper than I intended. He turned, a look of mild irritation on his face at being interrupted. "Ah, Mr. Thorne, good of you to finally join us. We've been hard at work keeping Willow Creek beautiful." "My garage," I said, my voice tight. "Someone was in my garage. A garment bag is missing. A blue, heavy-duty 1-inch. Higgins waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that?" "Yes, my team cleared out some unsightly items from around your property. There's a rather dusty old bag near your garage. Looked like it was full of rags. We're getting rid of clutter today, Mr. Thorne. Making things ship-shape." He gestured towards a fire. "Probably just some old clothes you've forgotten about. It's all part of the service the HOA provides." The world tilted. The sounds of the neighborhood faded to a dull roar in my ears. Rags? Old clothes? I stared at the smoking pile, then back at Higgins's smug face. A flash of dark blue amidst the gray ash caught my eye. A glint of something metallic. I pushed past one of the volunteers, ignoring their startled yelp, and used a discarded rake to carefully pull a charred, misshapen lump from the edge of the fire. The heat was intense, but I barely felt it. Part of a sleeve, the wool scorched and brittle. And there, melted and twisted but still horribly recognizable, was a fragment of a gold service stripe, the kind sewn onto the sleeve of a Marine Corps dress blue uniform. One of my service stripes. A coldness settled deep in my chest, a chilling fury that eclipsed the initial shock. I looked up at Higgins, my gaze locking onto his. The casual cruelty, the utter desecration of something so sacred, was incomprehensible. "That," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "was my United States Marine Corps dress blue uniform, Mr. Higgins." "My uniform? And you burned it?" Higgins blinked, a flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossing his features, but it was quickly replaced by his usual bluster. "Well, how was I to know? It was on your property, looking like refuse. Honestly, Mr. Thorne, if it was so important, you should have secured it properly. Community guidelines clearly state all personal property should be neatly stored. We can't be expected to inspect every piece of trash," he actually scoffed. "Besides, it's just a uniform, isn't it? You can probably get another 1-inch. Just a uniform." The words echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness inside me. My vision tunneled. Every medal, every ribbon, every stripe on that uniform told a story of sacrifice, a deployment Sarah had waded through, of brothers I'd lost. It was the uniform she'd last seen me wear with such pride at my retirement ceremony, her hand on my arm, her smile a beacon. And this pompous little man had reduced it to ashes and dismissed it as trash. The discipline of 22 years in the Corps slammed into place, a steel wall against the raw grief and rage threatening to consume me. My hands clenched, then slowly, deliberately unclenched. Observe, orient, decide, act. Hot, impulsive anger wouldn't serve me here. This required something else. Something cold, methodical, and relentless. "Mr. Higgins," I said, my voice devoid of inflection, "you have no understanding of what you've done. But you will." I turned away from the smoldering pyre of my past and walked back to my house, each step measured. The battle lines had been drawn, not on some foreign field, but right here in Willow Creek Estates. And Bartholomew Higgins had just made an enemy of a man who knew a thing or two about fighting for what mattered. He thought he was dealing with a quiet retiree. He was about to find out he was dealing with a gunnery sergeant of Marines. And the Corps always looks after its own. The first thing I did was document. My mind, trained for after-action reports and meticulous record-keeping, switched into a familiar gear. I took photographs of the burn pit from every conceivable angle, zooming in on the charred remnants I was certain belonged to my uniform. I photographed my open garage window, the empty hook, the slight scuff marks near the door indicating it might have been pried. I wrote down Higgins's exact words, his dismissive tone, the names of the 2 volunteers I'd seen, though they seemed more like hapless pawns than malicious actors. My training kicked in, not the combat skills, but the investigative mindset, the attention to detail that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. This man, Higgins, he operates on rules, I thought. His rules. I need to understand them. And then I need to understand the rules that govern him. The next morning, I presented myself at the HOA office, a small, stuffy room in the community clubhouse. Higgins was there, already looking self-important behind a large desk. His surprise at seeing me was palpable. "Mr. Thorne," he said, a note of caution in his voice now. "What can I do for you?" "I require a copy of the complete Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association bylaws," I stated, my tone polite but firm. "Additionally, I'd like any incident reports or logs pertaining to yesterday's community cleanup, specifically any documentation regarding items removed from private properties, including mine." Higgins puffed up slightly. "Well, that's rather unusual. Such documents are typically for board members. Are you planning on making a formal complaint about your old clothes?" The sneer was back. "I am planning on understanding the full scope of the HOA's authority and actions, Mr. Higgins," I replied evenly. "And yes, a formal complaint will be forthcoming regarding the destruction of my personal property of significant monetary and immeasurable sentimental value." He still doesn't get it. He thinks this is about a forgotten suit. Reluctantly, after some hemming and hawing about protocol, he had his secretary, a nervous-looking woman named Doris, provide me with a thick binder of bylaws and a flimsy, hastily written cleanup log that vaguely mentioned various debris removed from multiple lots. My property was listed, with a notation "discarded garment bag, contents unknown, assumed refuse," signed by B. Higgins. Assumed refuse. He didn't even bother to check. I spent the next few days poring over the HOA documents. They were a labyrinth of petty regulations, from the approved shades of beige for exterior paint to the maximum allowable height for garden gnomes. But within that mess, I started to see patterns, vague clauses that gave the president wide discretionary powers and a lack of clear accountability for property damage. I also started talking to my neighbors, quietly, discreetly. My initial polite inquiries about the cleanup day slowly turned into cautious conversations. Many were intimidated by Higgins. "Bart runs a tight ship," one older gentleman told me, his voice low. "Too tight, if you ask me. But what can you do? He'll fine you for looking at him sideways." But then I met Eleanor Vance. She was a widow in her late 70s, with a spark in her eye that reminded me a little of Sarah. I found her sadly surveying a row of brutally hacked rose bushes in her front yard. "Higgins's beautification committee," she said, her voice trembling with quiet fury when I asked what happened. "He said they were overgrown and obstructing the sidewalk. My late husband planted those roses for our 25th anniversary." Her eyes welled up. "That man has no heart, Mr. Thorne. No respect for anything but his own reflection in that blasted clipboard." Eleanor became my first ally. She'd lived in Willow Creek for 30 years and had witnessed Higgins's slow ascent to power and the subsequent reign of nitpicking terror. She had files, meticulous notes of every perceived injustice, every questionable HOA expenditure, every dismissive remark Higgins had ever made at a community meeting. "I knew someday someone would need this," she whispered, handing me a surprisingly thick folder. "I just didn't know it would be a Marine." Through Eleanor, I met David Chun, a young software engineer with a wife and 2 small children. Higgins was finding him on a weekly basis because his son's portable basketball hoop, always stored neatly by the garage after use, was, according to Higgins, an unacceptable blight on the community's aesthetic harmony. "The guy's a petty tyrant," David fumed when we met for coffee, away from Willow Creek's prying eyes. "I've tried to reason with him. Show him the bylaws don't even specifically forbid it. He just makes up new interpretations on the spot. My wife wants a move, but why should we be bullied out of our home?" David, with his tech skills, became another crucial part of our small, burgeoning resistance. He started digging into the HOA's financials, which were supposed to be transparent, but were buried in confusing spreadsheets. He also researched the preferred landscaping and maintenance companies Higgins always insisted on using, uncovering connections that smelled distinctly of cronyism and inflated contracts. My own investigation focused on the legalities. I contacted a fellow retired Marine, Colonel Davies, now a lawyer specializing in Veterans Affairs. While he confirmed the Marine Corps couldn't directly intervene in an HOA dispute, he was appalled by the story of my uniform. "Gunny, that's an outrage," he'd boomed over the phone. "A dress blue uniform is sacred. It's not just cloth. It's a symbol of everything we stand for." Higgins's actions, his blatant disrespect, it's an insult to every man and woman who's ever worn the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. He offered to look over any legal documents I prepared and provided me with contacts for veteran advocacy groups who might be interested in the story if it escalated. He also pointed me towards state statutes governing HOA conduct, which, it turned out, Higgins was likely violating in several areas concerning due process and fiduciary responsibility. The more we uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Higgins wasn't just an overzealous enforcer of rules. He was running Willow Creek like his personal fiefdom, enriching himself and his buddies, and crushing any dissent with arbitrary fines and intimidation. My burned uniform was just the most egregious symptom of a much deeper disease. Higgins, meanwhile, was not oblivious to my activities. He'd seen me talking to Eleanor and David. His demeanor towards me shifted from dismissive arrogance to outright hostility. New, ludicrous violation notices started appearing on my door. One cited my perfectly manicured lawn for non-uniform blade height variance exceeding 1/4 inch. Another claimed my mailbox, identical to every other one on the street, was architecturally incongruent with community standards. He even brought it up at the next HOA monthly meeting, which I attended along with Eleanor and David. "It seems," Higgins announced, staring pointedly at me, "we have certain newer residents who are struggling to adapt to our community's high standards. Perhaps they're more accustomed to less orderly environments. Rest assured, the board will ensure compliance for the good of all his sycophantic board members." A nervous-looking treasurer named Miller and a stern-faced woman, Agnes Periwinkle, who seemed to worship Higgins, nodded vigorously. "He's trying to paint me as the problem," I realized. The disruptive element. His overconfidence was palpable. He genuinely believed he was untouchable, that his little kingdom was secure. He had no idea of the storm gathering on his horizon. The knowledge of his corruption, his petty cruelties, and the deep disrespect he'd shown fueled not a burning rage, but a cold, hard resolve. He thinks this is a skirmish about HOA rules. He's about to find out it's a full-scale operation to restore decency and order. Our little alliance, myself, Eleanor, David, and now, with remote counsel from Colonel Davies and a local retired civil lawyer, Arthur Jenkins, whom Eleanor had known for years, began to formulate a multi-pronged strategy. Arthur, initially cautious, had become quite animated after reviewing Eleanor's meticulously kept files and hearing about my uniform. "This Higgins fellow," Arthur had declared, his spectacles perched on his nose, "is a textbook example of a petty despot drunk on minuscule power. We shall provide him with a robust education in humility and legal consequence." Our plan was fourfold. First, Arthur drafted a formal demand letter to the HOA board, specifically to Higgins. It detailed the destruction of my uniform, citing negligence, trespass, destruction of personal property, and infliction of emotional distress. It conservatively estimated the replacement cost of a gunnery sergeant's full-dress blue uniform with all earned medals and insignia at several $1,000s, but emphasized that the sentimental and symbolic value was incalculable. It demanded not only full monetary compensation, but also a formal public apology from Higgins and the HOA. This will put him on formal notice, Arthur explained, and his response, or lack thereof, will be telling. Second, spearheaded by Eleanor, we began discreetly canvassing other residents, collecting signatures for a petition to call a special meeting of the Homeowners Association. Our aim, to present our findings regarding Higgins's abuses of power, financial mismanagement, and bylaw violations, and to call for a vote of no confidence in his leadership. Eleanor's long standing in the community and her gentle but persistent manner made her ideal for this sensitive task. Many residents, initially fearful, found courage in numbers and in Eleanor's quiet conviction. Third, David, ever the pragmatist, suggested we approach local media. A story like this, decorated Marine's uniform deliberately destroyed by an arrogant HOA president who's also possibly fleecing the residents? That's got legs, Gunny. Public exposure is a powerful disinfectant. He began researching local investigative reporters known for tackling consumer advocacy and community issues. Fourth, and this was my particular focus, was the core angle. I wasn't seeking direct military intervention. That was neither appropriate nor feasible. Instead, I drafted a carefully worded letter with Colonel Davies's input to the national headquarters of the Marine Corps League and a couple of prominent veterans advocacy organizations. I detailed the incident dispassionately, focusing on the disrespect shown to the uniform and what it represents. I attached photographs of the charred remains and a copy of Higgins's dismissive cleanup log. I wasn't asking them to fight my HOA battle, but to be aware of how a symbol of their institution, and by extension, all veterans, had been treated. Let the ripple spread, I thought. Let them know that such an act doesn't go unnoticed by the Brotherhood. Higgins's reaction to Arthur's demand letter was predictable. He apparently laughed it off during a board meeting, according to Doris, the secretary, who had become a reluctant source of information for Eleanor. He called it frivolous and the ramblings of a disgruntled troublemaker, Doris had whispered to Eleanor over the phone. Soon after, I received a bombastic, threatening letter from an expensive-looking law firm, presumably hired with HOA funds, accusing me of harassment and defamation, and demanding I cease and desist all activities critical of President Higgins and the board. The pressure ramped up. Higgins, clearly feeling the heat despite his outward arrogance, began to lash out more erratically. Eleanor received a formal warning that her beloved, albeit recovering, rose bushes were still non-compliant and faced imminent removal by the HOA if not rectified within 48 hours. David found a lien slapped on his house for the accumulated, disputed fines for the basketball hoop, a move clearly designed to intimidate and financially cripple him. Other residents who had signed Eleanor's petition reported sudden, baseless violation notices for things like improperly shaded window coverings or excessive lawn ornamentation, referring to a single, tasteful garden flag. He's overplaying his hand, I observed. He's desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. The threats, however, were real. Eleanor was distraught about her roses, a living link to her late husband. David was understandably panicked about the lien. I met with them, along with Arthur, in my living room. He's trying to break us apart, David said, running a hand through his hair. Maybe this is too much. I can't risk my house. Eleanor, though visibly shaken, straightened her shoulders. Bartholomew Higgins has been bullying this community for years, David. If we back down now, he'll only get worse. My late George always said, stand up to a bully, Eleanor, or they'll walk all over you your whole life. George was right. Her courage was a steadying force. I looked at them, these ordinary people who had found extraordinary resolve. We knew this wouldn't be easy, I said. Higgins is predictable in his tactics. He attacks what people value to make them retreat. We won't retreat. Arthur, what's our counter for these specific threats? Arthur Jenkins, peering over his glasses, outlined strategies to legally challenge the lien and file an injunction against the HOA touching Eleanor's roses, citing harassment and retaliatory actions. His aggression is our opportunity, Arthur stated calmly. He's creating more evidence against himself with every foolish move. The stakes were undeniably higher. This was no longer just about my uniform or abstract principles of justice. It was about protecting these good people, my new neighbors, my allies, from a vindictive tyrant. My earlier grief over Sarah, the sense of displacement in this new civilian life, began to morph into something sharper, more focused, a profound sense of duty. Not to a chain of command, but to the small community that had unexpectedly looked to me. This is a different kind of frontline, Gunny, I told myself. But the principles are the same. Protect your people, accomplish the mission. The day of the special HOA meeting arrived cloaked in a tense, late afternoon humidity. We had gathered more than enough signatures, thanks to Eleanor's tireless efforts and the growing discontent among residents tired of Higgins's reign. Higgins had tried every procedural trick in his HOA manual to block or delay the meeting, but Arthur Jenkins had navigated the legal minefield expertly, ensuring it went ahead as mandated by the bylaws and state law. The community clubhouse meeting room was packed, an unusual sight for any HOA gathering, let alone one called by residents. A nervous energy crackled in the air. Higgins sat at the head table, flanked by his stone-faced allies, Agnes Periwinkle and the perpetually anxious treasurer, Miller. Higgins attempted to project an air of bored condescension, but I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his microphone, the way his eyes darted around the room, assessing the crowd. He wasn't used to this level of scrutiny, this open defiance. Arthur had coached me extensively on Robert's Rules of Order, the parliamentary procedure governing such meetings. He will try to control the agenda, shout you down, rule you out of order, Arthur had warned. You must remain calm, stick to the facts, and use the rules to your advantage, Gunnery Sergeant. As per the agenda we'd fought to establish, I was the first to speak after the meeting was called to order. Higgins tried to interrupt immediately. Now, before we get to any unsubstantiated allegations. Point of order, Mr. President, I stated clearly, rising from my seat. The agenda, as legally established and distributed, calls for resident presentations first. I believe I have the floor. A murmur went through the crowd. Arthur, seated beside me, gave a small, approving nod. Higgins, flustered, consulted his copy of the agenda, his face darkening. Very well, Mr. Thorne. Proceed, but keep it brief. We don't have all day for personal grievances. I walked to the small lectern, carrying a slim binder. Thank you, Mr. President, board members, and fellow residents of Willow Creek. I began, my voice steady, carrying easily through the room. I am Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne, United States Marine Corps, retired. I moved here seeking peace. Instead, on what Mr. Higgins called a community cleanup day, my personal property, including my Marine Corps dress blue uniform, was taken from my garage without my consent and destroyed in a bonfire supervised by Mr. Higgins himself. I paused, letting that sink in. I then detailed the incident, not with overt emotion, but with factual precision. The unsecured access to my garage, the dismissive attitude of Mr. Higgins, his admission of ordering the disposal, his exact words. It's just a uniform, isn't it? I showed large, clear photographs of the charred remains, the melted service stripe. An audible gasp went through the room. This uniform, I continued, represented 22 years of service to this nation. It bore medals earned in conflicts far from home, promotions celebrated with my late wife, Sarah. To Mr. Higgins, it was rags, refuse to me, and to any man or woman who has served. It is a sacred symbol of honor, courage, and commitment. Then I broadened the scope. But this isn't just about my uniform. It's about a pattern of disrespect, abuse of power, and financial mismanagement under Mr. Higgins' leadership. One by one, Eleanor Vance and David Chun took the floor. Eleanor, her voice trembling but firm, recounted the destruction of her roses, the constant harassment, and presented copies of HOA financial statements she had painstakingly analyzed, highlighting questionable expenditures on consulting fees to companies with no clear deliverables and inflated invoices from Higgins's preferred vendors. David followed, his presentation sharp and data-driven. Using a projector he'd brought, he displayed spreadsheets showing discrepancies in the HOA budget, the diversion of funds from essential maintenance to Higgins's pet projects, and evidence of the exorbitant fines levied against residents for trivial or fabricated offenses, including the lien against his own home. He showed online reviews for the cleanup company Higgins had used for the beautification day, revealing a history of complaints about property damage and, more damningly, that the company was co-owned by Higgins's brother-in-law. The room filled with angry murmurs. Higgins was apoplectic. Lies. Slander, he sputtered, banging his gavel. These are baseless accusations. This meeting is out of order. Mr. President, Arthur Jenkins rose calmly. All information presented is documented, and the residents have a right to hear it, as per the bylaws. It was then that I saw her, near the back, a woman I vaguely recognized from a local news channel, a notebook in her hand, her expression intent. David's media contact had come through. Her presence seemed to suck the remaining bluster out of Higgins. He sank back in his chair, his face pale. Then came the moment I had been both anticipating and carefully orchestrating. Mr. Higgins has repeatedly stated that what he destroyed was just a uniform, I said, my voice resonating with cold anger. He has shown no remorse, no understanding of its significance. It seems he believes such actions have no consequences beyond his little kingdom here in Willow Creek. I held up a letter. This is a communication I received from a national commandant of the Marine Corps League, a congressionally chartered veterans organization representing Marines and Fleet Marine Force Navy personnel across the country. It was sent after I informed them of the desecration of my uniform. I read aloud. The Marine Corps League is appalled and deeply concerned by the reported actions of your HOA president, Mr. Bartholomew Higgins, in ordering the destruction of a United States Marine Corps dress blue uniform. Such a uniform is not mere clothing. It is a hallowed symbol of the dedication, sacrifice, and unwavering fidelity of every Marine who has earned the honor of wearing it. The disrespect shown is an affront not only to Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, but to all veterans. While the League cannot directly intervene in private HOA matters, we stand in full support of Gunnery Sergeant Thorne and will offer any appropriate assistance through our veteran advocacy and legal support networks. Furthermore, we believe that any community association that permits or condones such blatant disrespect for symbols of national service reflects poorly upon itself and brings discredit to the values we all hold dear. We trust the residents of Willow Creek will take appropriate action to address this egregious matter and ensure such incidents are never repeated. A stunned silence fell over the room, thicker than the earlier humidity. The weight of the letter, the clear implication of broader condemnation beyond our small community, was immense. Higgins looked as if he'd been physically struck. His face was ashen. His remaining board allies, Miller and Periwinkle, suddenly looked very small and very alone. Agnes Periwinkle actually seemed to shrink in her chair. Higgins opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around wildly, as if seeking an escape route. His eyes fell on the reporter, who was now openly taking notes, her expression one of intense interest. In a last, desperate gamble, Higgins banged his gavel weakly. This is an outrage, an external interference. I call for a vote of confidence. In me, your duly elected president. No one moved. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Then, an elderly woman in the front row, someone I didn't know, stood up shakily. I vote no confidence in Mr. Higgins, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. Then another voice, no confidence. And another, he's got to go. Soon, a chorus erupted. Eleanor Vance then formally moved for a vote of no confidence in President Bartholomew Higgins, citing the evidence presented. Arthur Jenkins seconded it. The vote was a landslide. Higgins was out, his reign of petty tyranny brought to an abrupt and public end. The immediate aftermath was a blur of relieved chatter, handshakes, and even a few tears of joy from residents who had suffered under Higgins's rule for years. My initial objective, justice for my uniform, had been achieved, but it had snowballed into something much larger, the liberation of an entire community. The immediate sense of vindication was profound, a heavy weight lifting not just from my shoulders, but from the collective spirit of Willow Creek. The fallout for Bartholomew Higgins was swift and brutal. The next morning, the local news website ran the headline: HOA president ousted after burning decorated Marines uniform. Financial mismanagement and cronyism alleged. The story, featuring quotes from me, Eleanor, David, an excerpt from the Marine Corps League letter, painted a damning picture. The television segment aired that evening, complete with footage of Higgins's pale, stunned face during the no-confidence vote, juxtaposed with a picture of me in my full dress blues from my retirement ceremony that I'd provided to the reporter. Public outrage was immediate. Social media lit up with condemnation for Higgins and support for me and the residents of Willow Creek. More significantly, the article and the evidence presented at the meeting caught the attention of the State Attorney General's office, which announced within days that it was opening a formal investigation into the Willow Creek HOA's finances and Higgins's conduct during his tenure as president. Higgins became a pariah overnight. His cronies on the board, Agnes Periwinkle and Treasurer Miller, tendered their resignations within 24 hours, desperate to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. Higgins himself was reportedly served with a subpoena. The expensive law firm he'd hired with HOA funds quickly dropped him as a client once the source of their payment became questionable. He was forced, through a separate civil settlement arbitrated by Arthur Jenkins, to pay the full replacement cost of my uniform, a sum that, while significant, felt almost trivial compared to the public stripping of his power and reputation. The last I heard, he'd put his house up for sale, his little kingdom in ruins around him. My personal vindication was complete. The interim HOA board, quickly formed with sensible residents like Eleanor Vance, David Shunn, and guided by Arthur Jenkins, issued a formal public apology to me, which was printed in the community newsletter and read aloud at the next meeting. They acknowledged the profound disrespect shown and pledged to implement new guidelines, ensuring such an incident could never happen again. More than the apology or the money, it was the restoration of dignity that mattered. My uniform, the original, was gone forever, consumed by ignorance and arrogance. But its spirit, what it represented, had, in a strange way, been honored more profoundly through the fight to hold its destroyer accountable. I hadn't just gotten justice for a piece of clothing. I'd helped restore fairness and respect to my new community. A quiet sense of peace settled over me, different from the solitude I'd initially sought, deeper and more connected. Sarah would have been proud, I knew. She always believed in fighting for what was right, no matter how small the battlefield. In the months that followed, Willow Creek began to heal. Under the new interim board, which was soon formally elected with overwhelming support, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Transparency became the new watchword. Financial audits were conducted, revealing the true extent of Higgins's self-dealing, and steps were taken to recover misused funds. The ridiculous, nitpicking rules were either abolished or revised to reflect common sense and mutual respect rather than autocratic whim. Eleanor's roses, now properly cared for, began to flourish once more, a small but potent symbol of the community's renewal. David's kids played basketball freely, their laughter echoing in the afternoons, no longer a source of contention, but a welcome sign of life. The community clubhouse, once the seat of Higgins's power, became a place for genuine community gatherings, potlucks, and even a small library initiated by Eleanor. As for me, I found an unexpected new purpose. I didn't want a formal role on the HOA board. My days of seeking leadership positions were behind me, but I became an informal advisor, someone residents felt they could approach. I helped organize a neighborhood watch program, focusing on mutual support rather than punitive enforcement. And, at David's suggestion, I started a small, informal gathering for local veterans once a month at the clubhouse, a place to share stories, offer support, and just connect with those who understood the unique bonds of service. It wasn't the retirement I'd envisioned when Sarah was alive, but it had its own quiet rewards. I was no longer just a retiree in a new town. I was part of a community I had helped to mend. Bartholomew Higgins, I later learned, was eventually convicted on several counts of fraud and embezzlement related to his misuse of HOA funds. His downfall was complete, a stark testament to how arrogance and the abuse of even minor power can lead to ruin. His attempts to intimidate and silence those he wronged had only served to galvanize them and expose his own corruption. He had underestimated not just me, but the fundamental decency of the people he sought to control. Looking back, the burning of my uniform was a catalyst, an act of profound disrespect that ignited a spark of resistance. It taught me that the values I'd carried through my Marine Corps career, honor, courage, commitment, and a fierce dedication to justice, weren't confined to the battlefield or the barracks. They were principles for life, applicable even in the seemingly tranquil cul-de-sacs of suburbia. Sometimes the most important battles are fought in our own backyards for the simple right to live with dignity and respect. And sometimes it takes losing something precious to rediscover what truly matters and to find the strength to stand up not just for oneself, but for the community you call home. So that's my story. Higgins learned the hard way that you don't mess with a Marine, and you certainly don't desecrate symbols that mean the world to those who've served. The real victory wasn't just his downfall, but the reawakening of a community and the reminder that justice, even if delayed, can be incredibly satisfying. What do you think was Higgins's biggest mistake? His arrogance, his greed, or underestimating what a uniform truly represents? I'd love to hear your final thoughts in the comments. For me, this whole ordeal was a powerful reminder. Never stop fighting for what's right, and never underestimate the quiet strength found in good neighbors and shared principles. And to Sarah, wherever she is, this one was for you and for all those who serve with honor. Semper Fi.